Hey there, Twisters. Welcome to my NHL offseason power rankings. So we're going to look around the league at all 32 teams. And basically, this is a power rankings according to how they did this past season and some of the momentum that they might have generated at the end of last season and in the playoffs, in addition to some of the moves that they made in free agency or trades that they made out there. So comment down below, who do you think is the biggest winner in the offseason, and who do you think is the biggest loser in the offseason? And stick around for all sorts of content throughout the offseason, previews and predictions. We're going to get into that as early as late August, early September, and I'm fired up to continue making content for you guys. So here we go. So we're going to start at the bottom here with number 32. This is what I call kind of the tank hard for Bedard tier, and we've got 5 teams here. And at 32, I have the Philadelphia Flyers. I just really don't understand what this team is doing, what this franchise is doing. They hired John Tortorella. They brought in Tony DeAngelo, so certainly there could be a clash of personalities there. Joel Farabee and Ryan Ellis are going to be injured probably to start the season, or at least they're still recovering from that, so that's not particularly good for them. And yeah, this team just really needs to tear things down completely, and they haven't really done much to do that just yet. At least I don't think so. In 31st, they could be a little bit higher. I've got the Blackhawks. They were 27th in points percentage. Philly was 29th, by the way. So the Blackhawks, of course, they traded Kirby Dach and Alex DeBrincat. Didn't even get that much value for DeBrincat. They signed Max Domi and Andreas Athanasiou, which I've been told is certainly to maybe get assets for them in return later in the season, like around the trade deadline. So that's not bad. They got Petr Mrazek, so they have a more experienced goaltender back there, but he's always hurt. And really, at the end of the day, the Kane and Taves contracts are still on the books. Even if those guys want to play there could still be some value with those players. At least they'll be at the end of their contracts, I think, at the end of next season. But yeah, this team is certainly starting a big rebuild going forward. In 30th, I have the Arizona Coyotes. They were 31st in points percentage in the regular season. And, with this team, I think that they performed better than we expected this last year. And who knows, maybe they bring in some cast-offs, guys like Troy Stecher, Patrick Nemeth, Nate Bjugstad, Zach Kassian. They got a good haul for him. And maybe these guys actually gel pretty well together. But yeah, this team is still quite a ways away, I think, from being among the more competitive teams in the NHL. Phil Kessel leaves, so that certainly leaves a bit of a void for scoring. In 29th, I had the Montreal Canadiens. They were last in points percentage in the offseason. They retained Martin St. Louis as their head coach. They bring in Yevgeny Dodonov, a good veteran presence with some scoring upside. Mike Matheson had a pretty good year last year for Pittsburgh. They trade out Romanov and Jeff Petrie, but they get some decent assets in return. They drafted Juraj Slafkovsky, who I think we can expect in the lineup. Lots of young talent to look forward to for the Montreal Canadiens. But yeah, that Atlantic Division got quite a bit better in the offseason. At least some of those bottom feeders did. So I think Montreal is going to be kind of dead last in that division. And lastly, for this tier, I have my team, the San Jose Sharks. Now, certainly big changes for the Sharks. They traded away Brent Burns. Didn't get the greatest in return for him. Mike Grier comes in as the new general manager. Doug Wilson had stepped down, and the director of scouting, Doug Wilson Jr., had parted ways with the organization. They fired Bob Bugner really late, and they bring in David Quinn, who a lot of people don't really seem to like all that much, but I'm more about let's watch and see what happens here as this new regime is sort of ushered in here. Some of the depth moves that they made, a few head scratchers. They still have to sign Mario Ferraro and Dylan Gambrell, and now they're up against the cap, so I'm hoping they can find a way to get things done. But yeah, the on-ice product, I don't expect it to get any better. If anything, I think it should be just a little bit worse this year. Now we've got the long shots tier. Now these are teams that I don't think will make the playoffs, but they could be pretty competitive for a majority of the season. I am expecting a bit of a bounce back from the Seattle Kraken. I've got them at 27th. Shannon talked about them pretty favorably on his channel. They were 30th in points percentage this past season. They got Andrei Burakovsky, and they also acquired Oliver Bjorkstrand in a trade. So this is a really middle six heavy team. They've got a great second and third line, but the top line is lacking a little bit for them. Certainly scoring was not a forte for them. The defense still looks pretty good, and they hired a new goaltending coach, which I hope helps to get Philip Grubauer to bounce back, and hopefully Drieger once he comes back. They have Martin Jones in the meantime, shout out. But yeah, I still think this team is a ways from being kind of a wild card contender in that division, even though it's a little bit weaker. In 26th, I had the Buffalo Sabres. They were 24th in the regular season. I think that they're certainly building towards something. Don Granato comes in there, really galvanizes the locker room, Alex Tuch is certainly a breath of fresh air for this franchise as well. Not really a big offseason for them. They got Ilya Lyubushkin, they lost Will Butcher, a couple other minor moves, which I won't really highlight for each team, just pretty much the major ones. They finished the season really strongly, actually. They won 16 of their last 28 games. Really looking forward to what I can see out of, Owen Power and Dahlin. Will he be in the Norris Trophy conversation this upcoming season? He had a great year last season. Still a little weak in goaltending, even though Craig Anderson plays pretty well for somebody who's 40 years old. So Buffalo, even though I have them pretty low, I still think that they've got momentum on their side. In 25th, I had the Anaheim Ducks. They were 23rd in points percentage this regular season. And I mean, they were really contending for a playoff spot for much of this past year. They shed a couple of players, got good assets in return. Really like what I'm seeing from general manager Pat Verbeek at the time. Although I am a little bit scratching my head as to why Sonny Milano hasn't been signed. They bring in Strome from the Rangers and Vetrano for that matter as well to help bolster the middle six. And of course, they got lots of young talent with players like Trevor Zegras, and we'll see what Mason McTavish is able to do, and also Jamie Drysdale. So again, they're building towards something. I just don't necessarily expect them to be in a playoff spot because there are some more established teams ahead of them in the division, in my opinion. In 24th, kind of like the Flyers, I really don't understand what's going on with this franchise. It's the New York Islanders. Really no moves in free agency whatsoever. Their biggest move of the offseason is getting Alexander Romanov from the Montreal Canadiens, and they gave up a decent amount in return as well. They still have $11 million left in cap space to sign players like Romanov, Dobson, and Bellows. But yeah, I don't expect them to necessarily take such a big leap forward that they find themselves back in the top three in that division. I think they're better teams. In 23rd, just ahead of the Islanders, and in the same division, I have the Devils. They made lots of moves in the offseason, some good ones, certainly. They were 28th in points percentage in the regular season. They bring in Andre Palat for a lot of offense, had a monster postseason with Tampa. Eric Howlett comes in, good middle six player. John Marino for a defense that needs some good stay-at-home defensemen. Pavel Zacha, Yannick Kokkonen, PK Subban, probably not playing on the team this upcoming year. Still have $8.7 million left to sign Jesper Bratt. We'll see if Simon Nemec actually plays for them this upcoming season as well. They bring in Andrew Brunette as a assistant coach. Of course, he was the head coach for the Florida Panthers. Question marks with goaltending. They bring in Vanacek, who I do like, but I don't see him as a true number one. But is Mackenzie Blackwood a true number one? If they can figure that out, then yeah, maybe this team does battle for a wild card spot. Now for the next tier, we do have wild cards. These are teams who I think could be playoff teams, maybe not, kind of like bubble teams, I suppose. We'll start at number 22 with the Winnipeg Jets. They were 19th in points percentage. They hire Rick Bowness as their head coach. They keep Pierre-Luc Dubois, but they don't really make any big moves to bolster the roster. Mason Appleton is still an RFA. I hope they find a way to get a deal done there. They have plenty of cap space, but other than that, this team, I just don't know. Even though they have some good talents, Nikolai Ehlers and certainly Kyle Connor, a top goal scorer in the NHL, do those pieces really fit together for a playoff team, or is it time to retool this team? We'll have to see if Cole Perfetti can be a bit of an X factor for this team. Connor Hellebuck, can he have a Vezina caliber season? If he does, this team could be in the playoffs. If not, I think there are better teams in the Central. In 21st is a very fascinating team here. It's the Ottawa Senators. They were 26th in points percentage this past year. I still think that their defense is a little unproven. I don't necessarily think that they're going to be the best at keeping the puck out of the net. I do like getting Cam Talbot there. I think that he'll certainly have something to prove, or at least he'll feel that, given what happened in Minnesota with him getting traded away in favor of Fleury. They also bring in Claude Giroux and Alex DeBrincat, so they could score tons of goals. They could be a top 7, top 8 offense in the NHL this upcoming season. But again, I still think that there are some holes on the roster. Lots to look forward to, though. Maybe these guys actually do find a way to get into the postseason. I don't know why I deleted my notes here on this next team, but at 20th, I have the Vancouver Canucks. Look, this team was really good under Bruce Boudreau. I think for most of his time there last year, when he was the interim head coach, they were the best team in the NHL defensively. A huge reason is Thatcher Demko. This guy is just really hitting his prime, if that. And I think he'll be a Vezina finalist this upcoming season. So I really think that that could be the glue for this team. You still have all the weapons out there. Besser was retained. They haven't traded away anybody else like JT Miller or Connor Garland, and they're fantastic players, and I think that they could certainly help the Canucks get into the playoffs. But of course, I do have a few other teams ahead of them in that division. So in 19th, it's weird to have them all the way down in 19th, so let me know in the comments below. I know that my rankings could be very polarizing. So that's the beauty of this, though. You get a take that you don't get elsewhere necessarily. 19th, I've got Vegas, and I know I'm a Sharks fan, but at the end of the day, this team is very thin in their bottom six. They're in cap trouble. They haven't signed Kolasar, Haig, or Nicholas Waugh as I make this video. They've had a lot of injuries over the past season, so can these guys stay healthy? Players like Martinez and Stone certainly come to mind, Lanner as well. And who knows what happens with backup goaltending for them. I do like that they hired Bruce Cassidy. I think that he could be a better option than Peter DeBoer as he kind of wore out his welcome there. And yeah, they have some great weapons, but do they have enough as a team cohesively? I'm starting to kind of doubt that. In 18th, I've got the Columbus Blue Jackets. They were 21st in points percentage last year, but they were at least around 500 for a points percentage for most of the season. And so I think this team could definitely surprise some people, certainly with a weapon like Johnny Gaudreau being added. But like Patrick Laine, I had no idea he was a point per game player last season. You have Goodbranson that you added to the backside. You have Oliver Bjorkstrand on the way out, unfortunately. But there is young talent like Cole Sillinger, like Kent Johnson. And I think that maybe this team could click next season and surprise some people, challenge for a wild card. And Gaudreau, man, he had a Hart Trophy caliber season. Is there as much talent right now in Columbus as Gaudreau had in Calgary? No, I still think he's going to create some sort of impact there. This team's going to be pretty fun to watch in the years ahead. In 17th, it is a little bit surprising to have them here. I've got the Boston Bruins. They were 10th in points percentage. So really, I have them just outside the playoff picture as these rankings stand. But really, this team is behind the 8 ball going into this upcoming season. There are significant injuries to Brad Marchand and Charlie McAvoy and Matt Grzelcyk. These are huge pieces on the roster. The Bergeron deal hasn't been finalized just yet. At least the Bruins haven't announced that. We're not sure what's going to happen with David Krejci. They lose Eric Howla. They get Pavel Zacha, but I don't really think he's going to be much of an X factor for this team. The Pasternak trade talks have fortunately died down, so I don't think he would be moved. They hired Jim Montgomery as their head coach, who had success in Dallas. And I think that this team is lacking some depth. The injuries don't help whatsoever. A new coach, I think that certainly he could still do a good job there. But from a personnel standpoint, when you look at the roster that could be on the ice for opening day, it doesn't look particularly good. And as I mentioned earlier, the Atlantic is only getting stronger. And just ahead of them in 16th, I have the Detroit Red Wings, 25th in points percentage this past season. But so much young talent with guys like Raymond, Seider, and Edvinsson. And then look at their free agency. This is ridiculous. They bring in Andrew Kopp, right? Fantastic middle six player. David Perron, who was wonderful for the Blues this last year. Dominic Kubalik for some depth. Ben Sherratt to stabilize the backside a little bit. I know Sherratt's pretty polarizing, but I've always liked him, but that's just me. Ville Husso, he is an X factor for this team. Nedeljkovic did not play well in net last year. I think that was somewhat a result of the defense from guys who are not Moritz Seider. But Husso, he was really good for a good stretch of last season. Not so good in the playoffs, though. So how do they manage the goaltending situation? I think that's certainly a big factor for a lot of teams in the NHL, but for the Red Wings especially this season. They still have to sign Zadina. They still have $10 million in cap space. And yeah, this team's going to be really interesting, especially with a new head coach. They got Derek Lalonde, former assistant with the Tampa Bay Lightning, so lots of success that he brings to the table here. In 15th, I think this team is due for a decline in the next couple of seasons. It's the Washington Capitals. They were 13th in points percentage. For last season, for a majority of it, they were actually a pretty bad team. If you look at their wins and losses, they got kind of hot toward the end there. Certainly lots of weapons like Ovechkin, Oshie, Backstrom, when he's healthy, Carlson, and Eller. But those guys I just mentioned there, they're all like over 32 years old. So some of them could be dropping off. And yes, there are younger players like Kuznetsov and Tom Wilson who are still very good for them. They bring in Dylan Strome. I think that's a pretty good fit. Darcy Kemper comes in, but they lost Vitek Vanacek and Ilya Samsonov. So Darcy Kemper has to really be the number one here. I don't know if Zach Fucali is someone who's going to start 35 or 40 games for the Capitals this upcoming season. I'm just not entirely convinced with how this team played this last season. And if Backstrom is out for a long time, and if someone like Dylan Strome doesn't come in and fill that void, I could really see maybe even Peter Laviolette being fired, unfortunately, and I do like him. So I'm not sold on Washington too much. And last in my bubble/wild card group, I have the Minnesota Wild, and I like the Wild. They finished 5th in points percentage this last season, but I think that this was a bad offseason for them, frankly. They lost Kevin Fiala. They lose Cam Talbot, who played really well in the second half, and extend Fleury, who was not good in the playoffs. They get Philip Gustafsson as their backup goaltender. I like the Jake Middleton extension. He was a good fit there. The Suter and Parisi buyouts really did hinder this team's ability to make moves in free agency. And unless Matthew Boldy or Marco Rossi can, really step up their play this upcoming season, and if Kaprizov is not able to play the full 82 games for his situation, it's a competitive division after the Colorado Avalanche in the Central. So I think that even the Wild could be an odd team out this upcoming year. Our next group are the Dark Horses. These are teams who I think could maybe make a deep run in the playoffs, but I think they'll at least get into the postseason. So we have 13 more teams to talk about. 13th, I've got the Predators, 16th in points percentage. Pretty good offseason for them. I like the Nino Niederreiter deal. That was a really good value. Ryan McDonough they trade for, who had another great defensive season in Tampa. They lose Philippe Myers, but overall, I do think that helps their back end with players like Roman Josi still there. Luke Hunnan comes out of the lineup. Not a huge loss for them with the Niederreiter signing. David Riddick out, Kevin Lankinen in. Really not much of a difference there. As long as Saros is able to play 67 or 68 games, I think they'll be fine in between the pipes. But a big question going forward is, will we see a similar season from Johansson, Duchesne, and Forsberg? Really had a great resurgence this past year, but in the playoffs, they fizzled out. So if they can at least sort of tread water, I think that this team could still be in the postseason. In 12th, they were 9th in points percentage this last season. It's the St. Louis Blues. They lose Ville Husso, so they're really counting on Binnington to be the number one for this upcoming season. Thomas Greiss is the backup now. Not very good the last couple of years in Detroit. So Binnington, even though he was good in the playoffs, can he put it together over the course of an 82-game season? They made a couple of minor depth moves, bringing in Noel Acciari from the Florida Panthers. I like him quite a bit. Josh Levo as well. But other than that, pretty much the same roster that we saw last year. A very good team, but again, the goaltending I think could be their setback because I just didn't see it from Binnington last season through the whole course of 82 games in the playoffs. So that's why I've got them in 12th. In 11th, I kind of like what I'm seeing here with the Dallas Stars. They were 15th in points percentage. Peter DeBoer comes in as their head coach, and I know a lot of people don't like him, but the thing is that DeBoer in his first year with any team he's coached, they've been really good. Really good first year with the Panthers, with the Devils, went to the Stanley Cup final. Sharks, they went to the Stanley Cup final. Vegas went to the conference final. No more Vlad Nemesnikov, Radulov, who was certainly on the tail end of his career, Andre Sekera, to name a few players. They do bring in Mason Marchment, who I really like from the Florida Panthers, but we'll see what sort of talent is surrounding him on whatever line he's on. Sagan and Ben just haven't been the answer for that team. We'll see if they move down in their roles and responsibilities or if things get shaken up. But that being said, I really like the season that Jake Ottinger had. He was magnificent in the playoffs, and Wedgwood was a pretty good backup in his time in Dallas, and that top line is still absolutely fire with the likes of Robertson, Pavelski, and Hintz. So I think that Dallas could still be a playoff team this upcoming season. In 10th is a team that might surprise some of you out there. I have the LA Kings. They were 14th this past season. They got Kevin Fiala. That's a huge reason. And certainly they have players like Byfield, Turcotte, Kaliev. If these guys really take a step up in their play next year, when you consider that Kopitar and Doughty are still able to get it done, and you got Adrian Kempe, Iafallo, this team could actually be pretty deadly. Quick had a good bounce back season, and if they get better goaltending than they did last year from Peterson, I think this team could certainly contend for a top 3 spot in the Pacific. And in 9th, the last team in my dark horses, I got the Penguins. They were 12th in points percentage this last year, and you look at the last 3 years, absolutely decimated with injuries, and this team has still been really, really good under Sullivan, and they retained lots of their players as well. Malkin's back, Letang, Rust, Raquel, Casey DeSmith, Kasperi Kapanen. Jeff Petrie comes in, so you have more puck-moving dynamics on the backside. Josh Archibald, Ryan Poehling, Jan Rutta from the Tampa Bay Lightning, and Ty Smith as well. Now, they did lose plenty of players, don't get me wrong. John Marino, maybe the most notable, and Evan Rodriguez for that matter. They didn't re-sign him. Brian Boyle, Mike Matheson, Danton Heinen, who I think scored like 18 or 19 goals this last year. So even though they lost some of that personnel, I do like what they brought in. I still think they have plenty of firepower, and defensively, this team was actually pretty good last year with the season that Jari had. So I still don't think that you can count out Pittsburgh to finish top 3 in their division. Now for spots 5 through 8, these are the great teams. I think that they could contend for their division, make deep playoff runs. In 8th, I have the Calgary Flames. Yes, they lost Gaudreau and Tkachuk. They bring in Jonathan Huberdeau and Mackenzie Weegar. Huberdeau being the best player in that trade, and we'll see what he could do for a player like Tyler Toffoli on his other wing. So It will be interesting watching Hubie in Calgary. They also got Kevin Rooney for some depth, Eric Goodbranson and Calle Yarncroke out the door there. They still need to sign Oliver Shillington and Andrew Mangiapane, but they have over, I think, $9 million in cap space. Now, they do lack a little bit of depth in their bottom six. I do like Dylan Dubé, but other than that, not so much. But really, the strength of this team is defense and goaltending, and their defense just got a lot more dynamic with Uyghur. You also have Rasmus Andersson, who's able to move the puck pretty well, and you have good stay-at-home defensemen as well, like Chris Tanev. And the goaltending was very good for this team last year, not just with Markstrom, but also with Dan Vladar. So I still think that Calgary, despite losing 2 franchise cornerstones, I still think that they're a playoff team. In 7th, I have the Toronto Maple Leafs. They were 4th this past season. Most of their forward group remains the same. They did lose Ilya Mikheyev, Andre Kasha, Jason Spezza to retirement. So I do think that's a bit of a blow, but I do like them bringing in Calle Yarncroke, Nick Aube-Kubel from the Cup champion Colorado Avalanche, and Adam Gaudette join the group as well. In comes Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov. I'm not high on either of these goaltenders, to be honest, but maybe a change of scenery helps them out. Jack Campbell, of course, leaving for the Oilers, but I still think that, of course, the top 6 looks absolutely fire for this franchise. And if somebody like Rasmus Sandin can emerge this upcoming season, I actually like the defense fairly well for this team. I know that they've been criticized plenty. They extended Giordano. They still got, of course, Morgan Riley back there and Jake Muzzin. Let's just hope that he's healthy for 82 games. Still a very solid team. I think they could still challenge for first in their division. But just ahead of Toronto, I have the Florida Panthers. Of course, they won the President's Trophy last year, and they're still a very good team. But there have been a lot of changes and a lot of losses. So out Huberdeau, Uyghur, Mason Marchment, Frank Vetrano, Claude Giroux, Ben Sherratt, Noel Acciari, and Joe Thornton, just to name a few players. And when you think about what they got back, Matthew Tkachuk, of course, Rudolph Balcers, Chris Tierney, so a little bit of depth in the bottom 6, Colin White as well, Mark Stahl, and even Eric Stahl on a tryout, essentially, or a two-way deal. So I think that this team has gotten a little bit weaker. Now, they brought in Paul Maurice as their head coach, replacing Andrew Brunette, and of course, Maurice coached for many years with the Winnipeg Jets. I think this is still a pretty decent team. One thing that sets them back is the Anthony Duclair injury, somebody who could score 25, maybe even 30 goals. So he's going to be out for a long time with an Achilles injury. And the fact that Marchment and Vetrano, guys who you could slide into that second line, they're gone. I think that could certainly sting the Panthers early in the season. Nonetheless, I still think they're a pretty good roster. Bobrovsky had a good bounce back last year. We'll see if he can play more like that this upcoming season. And the last of our great teams here, the Edmonton Oilers at 5th. They were 11th in points percentage. They still need to come to terms with Yamamoto and Ryan McLeod. I like him quite a bit, by the way, after what I saw in the playoffs. They signed Matthias Janmark, so this team is still lacking some depth, at least for this time being. I like the Brett Kulak extension. He was their best defender, I think, in the playoffs. The Jack Campbell signing, he's a very good goaltender. I'm hoping that Stuart Skinner can be a good backup for them, though, because Campbell, I don't really see him starting more than 55 games at the most. They kept Evander Kane on an affordable deal as well. We'll see if he's able to stay out of trouble for them. And of course, they made a deep run this past postseason. They got 2 of the best players in the NHL. So I think Edmonton is still a lock for a top 3 spot in that division. And right now, they are my favorite to win the division. And lastly, we have our elite tier. So we've got our final 4. We're going to kick things off at number 4 with the Carolina Hurricanes. They were 3rd this past season in points percentage, and a team who I keep expecting to win the Stanley Cup. Maybe this is the year. Let's hope so, Caniacs. So they lost quite a few players. Vincent Trocheck, who was a monster for them in the playoffs, Nino Niederreiter to the Predators, Tony DeAngelo, Max Domi, Steven Lorentz, Ian Cole. They did lose a little bit of that depth in their defense, Brendan Smith as well. But they bring in Brent Burns to possibly play with Jacob Slavin. I absolutely love the idea of that pairing, especially for the power play too, because they needed that. You saw that in the playoffs. They were horrible on special teams. They bring in Andre Kasha to help out with the depth, and they also bring in Max Pacioretty. How could I bypass that? Of course, Pacioretty will also help them on the man advantage. So the forward group for this team still looks really good. They still need to sign Martin Necas, though. That is one sort of X factor. I think they have the cap space. Ethan Bear hasn't been signed either. But either way, I still really like the makeup of this club. We'll see if they can win the division, but it's more about what they can do in the postseason. But one team standing in their way in 3rd, the New York Rangers. They were tied for 7th in points percentage this past season. They still have $4.8 million in cap. We'll see what they do with Capo Caco. He hasn't been signed just yet. They traded out Georgiev, just wasn't able to put it together over the course of a full season. They bring in Yaro Halak for some experience, but it's Shesterkin's net, as we know. Out, Strome, Kopp, and Vetrano. So certainly they lost some players, but I love the addition of Vincent Trocheck. I love the way that we saw some of that young talent flourish in the playoffs, like Kakko, like Lafreniere. Really impressed by what I saw from him. And on the backside, you've got a fantastic top four. We talked about Carolina, great defense. Look at the Rangers, right? Adam Fox, Ryan Lindgren, Keandre Miller, Jacob Trouba. That is a terrific top four. And you've got the best regular season goaltender in Shesterkin. So I still think the Rangers are going to be a fantastic team. They'll be a favorite to win the Stanley Cup this upcoming year. In second, I had the defending Eastern Conference champion, the Lightning, also tied for 7th in points percentage this last year. Yeah, they lost Andre Palat, and that definitely stings, especially with the playoffs that he had. But as I said in my video about the Lightning going forward, I really like the idea of moving Ross Colton up there. He played not even 13 minutes of ice time per game last season and had 22 goals. So I think Colton is developing quite well. You also got Vlad Nemesnikov, who I think could emerge in that sort of role as well. They gained Philippe Myers. They traded away McDonough. The backside is still very, very strong for them. I like the Ian Cole signing quite a bit as well. And they signed Paul, Sergachev, Cirelli, and Chernak to very long-term extensions. And overall, that helps them be one of the better defensive clubs in the NHL for the foreseeable future. And of course, they got Vasilevsky. So I think that Tampa is still in great hands. Right now, I guess I have them winning the division. But as we can tell, Tampa isn't so keen on winning the division. It's all about what they do in the postseason. And I think that they still have the making to be a threat in the Eastern Conference. And in first, no surprise, I got the defending champion Colorado Avalanche, second in points percentage. They were in a pretty tough spot this offseason with all the contracts they had to consider, but I think they did a really good job. And I don't want to just credit Joe Sakic, but I also want to credit new general manager Chris McFarland. So we'll see what he's able to do in place of Burnaby Joe, as Joe Sakic now has a higher role in the organization. They kept Valeri Nichushkin, and they also kept Arturi Lehkonen. Very smart to lock those guys up long-term with their regular season and postseason performances. They kept Darren Helm. I loved watching Helm in the playoffs, and Andrew Cogliano, who was a really good fit for them as well. They lost Darcy Kemper. They gained Alex Georgiev. So their goaltending tandem going forward is Georgiev and Francouz. I think that's kind of a 1A, 1B situation. But we saw in the playoffs, it doesn't matter. You don't have to have an elite level goaltender, at least not on the Avalanche, in order to contend for a Stanley Cup. Now, they lost Andrei Burakovsky, which I expected to happen. Didn't have a great postseason, but he had a career year. They also lost Nico Sturm. We'll see what happens with Nazem Kadri. Keeping him, I think, would be absolutely huge for this franchise. But either way, I still think there are a couple of younger players to look forward to from the forward group. Alex Newhook, a lot of people are waiting for him to really break out. I'm a big fan of Logan O'Connor. I know he's a winger, but either so, I think they have a good forward group, and their backside is still fantastic. Keeping Josh Manson, really liked his postseason. Devon Taves and Cale Makar still back there as well, and some other players. I think they're fantastic, and they should still easily win the Central Division next year. Anyway, guys, what do your power rankings look like? Let me know in the comments below. Hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a thumbs up, and let me know. Biggest winner in the offseason, biggest loser in the offseason. Subscribe if you're new here. Follow me on social media. Just see the video description down below. We've got all sorts of content planned for the offseason here on Twisted Wrister Hockey. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. Once again, I'm Nick, and I'll catch you Twisters later. Ciao.